plus a certain number of other things, but let's say this. And I'm the former Director General of the International Cooperation and Development at the European Commission. Welcome to all the speakers. Mr. Carminati, on behalf of Cesare Maestri Pieri, Director of the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation, Kai Paplis, the Head of Unit of Investment Innovating Financial Instrument, good colleagues of my former colleagues of mine. Hi, Kai. Third, Antonella Baldino, who is the Chief International Officer of the Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, the responsible for the investment, let's say, plan. And Pierre Heilbronn, who is the Vice President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD. So we are all here. By the way, also welcome to Professor Piga and to the students of the course on global governance. And I feel a bit at home with all the students when I teach in Sciences Po in Paris, where we organize something similar. So very important. I'll try to give you some floor to raise some questions if you want. Now, without taking too much of your time, the session of today, the conversation of today, which is about development cooperation in the light of the challenges and in the light also of the new angle, which is about investment in particular. You know, it's a particularly important one in my view. It will be quite short, and I would like to indicate why this is important, and then I'll give the floor to the panelists. I think that the conversation is important because we are now in front of the challenges which have been created and or accelerated by the crisis. We have, let's say, seen that there are a couple of points on which we have to work and to further work at the European level. First, that doing together, we can make it, or in any case, we can have reasonable reasons to believe that we can do it. We did it, we are doing it in our recovery, but we also know that our recovery at the European Union level will not be possible if there will not be a recovery, in particular in our neighborhood, meaning Mediterranean, Africa, you know, and more in general, a sustainable recovery at global level. So therefore, this moment we have, let's say, a story to tell, which is about that doing better together at the European Union level, we can be stronger, we can be more effective. We are not there yet, but certainly all the experience made on the recovery is showing this. Now, it is time to show that, you know, our recovery is also their recovery. So therefore, to translate as much as possible, not only the way in which we have addressed these challenges, but to build together with our partners, African, Mediterranean, and elsewhere, you know, an agenda for bouncing back better, as we say. And this agenda is something which is in common. And in this agenda, the fact to do differently is particularly important. Doing differently means two things. First, to be more united as Europeans. The Team Europe, let's say, reality and experience is a very important message in order to be European Union. Italy, France, Germany, etc., and the Commission and the European actors like the European Investment Bank, like the EBRD, you know. So therefore, what to do, how to do together is part of our own recovery. So suddenly, the development and international cooperation is something which is very much linked to ourselves, is very much linked to the fact that we can work for a sustainable, let's say, recovery, a sustainable development. It was true under the SDG, let's say, language, but it is even truer today in the light of the crisis and the challenges which have been amplified by the COVID. So therefore, point number one is this. So being Europeans, how we can work better together in order to link, you know, the way in which we deal with the big challenges of globalization, of development, etc., with our partnership and approach with our partners. This is point number one. The point number two is about the instruments. Of course, there is the traditional approach, projects, humanitarian, you know, I mean, quite classical. But already before the crisis, the central role to be played by investment generating economic growth, generating jobs and creating jobs, creating sustainable jobs, in particular in the green economy, as we say, you know, and the digital economy was already underlined. I think that today this way of working, partnership for investments, you know, takes another important role. And therefore, I think, in particular, due to the presence here around the table, to protagonists of these are always the magic of the direct. You know, we have some protagonists in particular, Antonella Baldino, Pierre Heilbron, you know, and Kai, who are very much linked with this new way of doing development through investment. You know, I think it's particularly important to think together on what to do and how to do it together. Third point, at the European Union level, now we have a landscape which is much simpler, has been simplified, because there is an agreement, at least on a single legal basis, which is the newly instrument DCI, you know, which is replacing all the different legal bases existing so far, EDF, neighborhood, etc., which is therefore streamlining the capacity of intervening. And big part, the core of this instrument is very much linked to the setting of a guarantee up to 60 billion euros, which should be precisely an instrument to support, to facilitate, but also to do together at the European level. This guarantee is to the benefit of the development banks, like the Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, like the European Investment Bank, like the EBRD, you know, like others, I mean, development bank which exist at the level of member states. So we have now an instrument which is simplified. We have at the center of this instrument the investment objective through this guarantee, which is important in order to, let's say, turn our approach and the European approach. And this guarantee to work needs coordination, because it's not, let's say, a financial instrument which is mobilized by the Commission alone. On the contrary, can be mobilized only by the close work and cooperation between national agencies, banks like EBRD, and the Commission. So therefore, this is a bit these are the points that I would like to draw your attention on. And therefore, on this, let's say, environment, new challenges, new experiences in doing better and more at the European Union level, the Team Europe approach, the new instrument in DCI, and the guarantee for investment, which is at the center of this, it is on this basis that I would like to launch a bit the discussion in order to see what each panelist, I mean, representing an organization, you know, see itself into this dimension, which kind of suggestion in order to put all this into operation. You know, let's remain modest. We are equipped, but we have to turn that into practice. So how to do it, which kind of priorities, and which kind of instrument could be mobilized. So this is a bit the issue, which is very much linked to our discussion about how to deal with the crisis and its fallout. So I set the scene in this way. I'll maybe pass the floor immediately to Mr. Carminati, who's presenting the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation, and then Kai Parplis, Antonella Baldino, and Pierre Heilbron. Mr. Carminati, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mazzarbisi, for your very, very good view and vision about it. Let me say that I'm speaking on behalf of the director of the Italian Agency for Cooperation, the ambassador Maestri Pieri, that is not possible to be here. So it's a great pleasure to take part in this initiative, even more so in these challenging times, which call for stronger cohesion and cooperation among all players at national, European, and global level. As the main donor worldwide in terms of development assistance, we are aware that the European Union is expected to play a lead role in achievement of the Agenda 2030, and that member state agency along with the EU institutions, stand in the front line of this effort. Soon after starting its operation in 2016, in the framework of the Law 125, which is the law that make real our institution agency, engaged in the process of EU pillar assessment, so as far to qualify for the direct management of European funding. This process was successfully completed in 2018, but even earlier the agency was providing substantial technical support to the implementation of the initiative entrusted by the European Commission to the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. This shows how the relationship between the agency and the European Commission has been strong and vital since the very beginning. European funding initiative represents a significant component of ACS global endeavor. Today, we register 11 projects in the implementation phase for a total financial contribution about 110 million, and we have in pipeline another 114 million that will be signed by the end of the year. 6 of these actual projects were ended from the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the International Cooperation 2019, while the other 5 have been directly entrusted to the agency by the Commission. At the geographical level, we operate at the global level, of course, but the projects are based mainly in 2 regions, Middle East and North Africa, called MENA, and Sub-Saharan Africa. In particular, we have 3 projects that are being implemented in Senegal, 3 projects in Sudan, 1 in Niger, 1 in Burkina Faso, 1 in Central African Republic, and 1 in Libya. And from the regional perspective, we have Lebanon, Syria, and Iraqi Kurdistan for 1 project. Each of these contexts, of course, feature particular stakeholders' needs and security conditions, with the endogenous critical issue by the COVID-19 pandemic. Nevertheless, our agency field offices have always remained operational, possibly in the past months, and activity have not been halted. The agency has remained close to its partner on the ground and has continued to deliver, including the framework of European projects. The main sector of intervention can be identified as rural development, economic support to local enterprises, health, public governance, and support to local municipalities in providing service to migrants, internally displaced people, and hosting communities. Over 90% of our European projects have been funded by the specific trust fund, the EU Emergency Trust Fund for Africa, the EU Regional Trust Fund in response to Syrian crisis, and the BECO Fund. These instruments are proof of the will of the European Commission to intervene in crisis situations, such as Libya, the Sahel, and the Middle East, with a comprehensive approach which aims at addressing the nexus between emergency, peace, and development. Acting in the context of crisis does not prevent the planning of and the implementation of long-term strategies. For example, in mitigating the root causes of forced migration or in strengthening the capacity of local institutions, which are and will remain the primary point of reference for local population. This approach shows a full convergence of interest between the European Commission and the member state agencies like ours. We all have also experienced a fruitful cooperation between ACS field offices and the EU delegation in partner countries. A shared condition of proximity to the local population has favored the response to changing situations and demands. Like in the case of Senegal, where a significant project component has been reoriented to support over 130 economic activities hardly hit by the COVID-19 crisis. Next to the projects under implementation, ACS is currently engaged in the negotiation of another 11 projects, which have already received the preliminary approval and, as I said, are going to be signed in the end of the year. In countries like Tunisia, Egypt, Kenya, Mozambique, Colombia, and Albania. Culture, sustainable tourism, and the green economy are among the sectors which will be addressed by upcoming projects, holding a great potential for the dissemination of European experience. Our dialogue with the EU institution and with other member state agencies remains intense on sector strategy, implementing solution and procedural matters, also in strength of the transition. Indeed, the European Federation represents an asset for ACS, and as it provides additional resources which strengthen the overall impact of our mission. At the same time, we are convinced that the EU cooperation offers a peculiar value added in terms of witnessing the plural dimension of development, which is the outcome of multiple efforts. As a tangible large-scale project of peace and cooperation itself, which reflects a shared vision for a shared future, the European Union is on the front line for building partnership for the promoting common grounds out diversity worldwide. In other words, not only the specific contents of European projects, but also their origin and their methods become relevant and meaningful in the relationship with our partner. The Italian Agency for Development Cooperation is proud to be part of this European vision and is ready to support in the near future. And coming back to your, Mr. Manservisi, second topic that you were suggesting, partnership and partners for investment and to put in the center the bank of the investment. And as I see the director Antonello Baldino, I want to share that our reform and our law 125 put in the center this kind of partnership and collaboration, and we are working in the aim of your indication, as you said. So thank you for your attention, and I will be ready for any potential questions. Thanks a lot.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Caminati. I remind to everybody the rule of 5-7 minutes for intervention in order to have maybe a reply round and also to give students, if they wanted, to raise a couple of questions. Now, Kai Paplis, now you have been since the outset, since the time of the external investment plan and then building the new approach in the Commission, the guarantee, etc., at the very origin of all this new, let's say, approach and transformation. Now that the new instrument is not only putting that at the center, but also the new demand is also calling even more in thinking about investments and investment in common with the member states, you know, as a center of gravity of the international cooperation and partnership. What do you think about this? How you situate the work of the Commission and the challenges ahead of all of us? Kai, please.
Thank you, Stefano. I mean, effectively, I'm implementing a program, obviously, that you launched, and it's about actually to, the first phase is about to conclude quite successfully on the 12th of November in the Finance in Common Summit in Paris. So you already mentioned that we, over the last few years, the European Commission in its International Cooperation Department, we've increasingly used our development cooperation funds to try to bring more investments into developing countries, in particular into Africa and what we call the EU neighborhood, the countries around the EU in the East and then in Northern Africa. And our flagship program right now is the 1.5 billion euro so-called EFSD guarantee program, the European Fund for Sustainable Development. You mentioned already this will grow to 60 billion from next year, over 7 years. So this 1.5 billion euro program actually turned out to be a pilot for an even stronger emphasis on investment. Why do we pay so much attention to investment? After all, we are a donor. Traditionally, we would provide grants to projects. Why are we now increasingly focusing on investment? I would identify at least two reasons. I mean, there are more, but at the very least, there are two reasons. One is that we can have a much greater impact if we manage to divert only a very small proportion of the global investment flows. I mean, you have, according to some estimates, something like 253 trillion euros. That's 253,000 billion euros in investable assets that's available around the world. So there's a lot of money that potentially could flow to Africa, but it isn't right now. So we want to divert these funds to markets where we think they can have a very positive impact. And if it's even 1%, I mean, we would have an enormous impact if an additional 1% of global investment flows did flow into developing countries. So that's number one. We can have a much stronger impact if we manage to affect global investment flows and redirect them. And the second reason is, I would argue, that there are some sectors where grants simply don't work. And these are sectors that are essential for the functioning of a developed economy. I mean, think of SMEs, think of energy generation. I mean, all of these things, no SME sector has developed because someone landed with a suitcase of money. But these have developed because there is access to credit. There's a good business environment for these kind of sectors to develop. So that's where we want to go. We believe via bringing more investment, we can have a much stronger development impact than we would otherwise have. And this, we believe, is to a large degree about perceived risk rather than actual risk. When we look at projects that, in particular projects that are supported by development banks like CDP and like EBRD, they tend to have a very, actually quite a high rate of success. So the defaults are much lower than the very low ratings of the countries, of the different countries would imply. So we think this is very much about demonstrating to investors that the actual risks are lower than the perceived risks, and which is also why we are prepared to cover those risks. So that's the whole idea, de-risking and thereby trying to direct more money into developing countries. I already mentioned the sectors, the focal sectors. They're very much the SME sector, renewable energy, agriculture is very important, to a large degree, of course, also SMEs, digital sectors, and we're also trying to support public-private partnerships in municipal services. These are the initial focus sectors. Of course, you mentioned that as well. As the COVID crisis unfolded this year, we tweaked the investment program to help partner countries and businesses come back from the crisis. So we directed additional funds into liquidity support for SMEs with the help of our development finance partners. And quite importantly, actually, we also directed funds towards efforts together with Gavi in the so-called COVAX initiative to support the healthcare sector of our partner countries and enable them to procure vaccines, COVID vaccines, once they become available.
Okay,
thank
you.
Part of this,
please.
You mentioned, I show that. Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, where we tried to show that we don't only care about Europe's recovery, but we also care about our partners, and we want to help them to bounce back from the crisis. So that's quite important. Okay, you already mentioned the outcome is quite successful. I think rightly be considered a success, which is why we now have basically a political agreement on NDICI, where we will have up to 60 billion euros in guarantee capacity. It's quite an enormous increase. How do we deploy the guarantees? And that's perhaps a good segue to Antonella and Pierre. we in a way in the back office, we set up these guarantee programs together with our development finance partners, and they are then the market facing end. They deploy these guarantees in the market with an emphasis on private investors. We want, except in very difficult market settings, we want people like CDP and EBRD help us to bring more private investments into our markets. And that's where we work with the development finance partners to bring these guarantees to the market. I think we had an incredibly successful cooperation with the CDP in particular. I think Antonella and her colleagues, Martina Colombo and so on, they've, I mean, for a new institution in this field, I think they've done a tremendous job, and we're really excited about the guarantees that we are rolling out with them now. And then EBRD, of course, is a known, a much more known factor, obviously with a very strong track record in economic reform and private sector finance. So they're equally a extremely powerful and successful partner, alongside others, of course, like the European Investment Bank and the other European, the Team Europe actors. So this has been quite an exciting journey, a lot of new things. I think we all learned a lot. But I think at this point, we're about to conclude the program, and we're quite happy where we are right now.
Good. Thank you, Kai. Thank you. Very clear to describe also the system and the interactions. Now, Antonella Baldino, you are now a bit in the light of all what we have said, not only an important financial institution, but probably and progressively a bit the center of gravity of many things that the Italian cooperation, let's say, will do, not only standing alone, but even more in working in Europe, because as Kai just said, this guarantee is mobilized, these funds are mobilized only in partnership with the banks. And therefore, the Cassa Depositi e Prestiti is the Italian, let's say, development bank in a sense. So what do you plan to do? How you think you will build this new perspective, new in the sense of quantitative, maybe mean perspective, that it is ahead of us on the basis of the instruments and of the framework which has been described by Kai and which is described by the agreement on the new instrument. Please, Antonella.
Thank you, Stefano. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased and honored to take part in this 11th edition of the Diplomacy Festival and to give also our perspective of the new financial instrument provided by the European Union. I mean, the external investment plan, the orientation we had more recently. A few words about, I mean, the context, just to explain how we have designed our strategy during these challenging times. As we well aware, the current context is constantly evolving, and the COVID-19 crisis is hitting developing economy at a critical moment. Prior to the crisis, financing had already fallen short of the spending needed to achieve the SDGs by 2030, and the pandemic has further highlighted the critical issue currently affecting developing countries, the fragility of local health system and the weakness of local economic system. Firstly, COVID-19 has placed the health and the sanitary capability of the developing world under immense strain. And secondly, the crisis also risks creating major setback in financing for sustainable development in developing countries. So compared to, just to give you a figure, compared to 2019 levels, inflow and external private finance are projected to drop by $700 billion US, exceeding the impact of the 2008 global financial crisis by 60%. So in order to deal with a global crisis of this magnitude, of course, a rapid and coordinated response from the EU countries is needed, a response based on an integrated intervention model aimed at maximizing the impact of initiative through the effective and efficient use of available instruments. And development finance institutions such as CDP can play a role in the arrangement of an organic and timely response to the effect of the pandemic. Firstly, in order to close the COVID-19 financing gap, those institutions, the DFIs, can compensate for the drop of other sources of financing by focusing their intervention on supporting the local health system. And moreover, this institution can support local business and financial institutions and ensure access to resources required to mitigate the effect of the crisis and to invest in innovation, thereby fostering the development of a robust pipeline to also produce the development of robust pipeline for the post-crisis investment. So in this general framework, CDP, in its role of the Italian financial institution for development cooperation, is actively participating with our national institutional stakeholders, first of all, the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Economy and Finance, and of course also our agency for Italian cooperation, in order to design and implement initiatives supporting the recovery of developing countries. In particular, first of all, in managing the revolving fund for development cooperation, CDP implements the G20 initiative for the temporary suspension of payments of the poorest countries' sovereign debt, which is aimed at freeing up financial resources this country can use to fight the pandemic. And then CDP, like other European DFI, can play a major role in mobilizing additional private capital and blended finance solution, structuring transaction based on a public-private partnership approach in order to maximize the impact of our aggregate intervention. And in this regard, I would like to highlight a couple of initiatives. One is the task force promoted by IFC aimed at expanding the financial resources dedicated to supporting the private sector in the distribution of healthcare supply, and the initiative promoted by the European DFIs through European DFIs Association, which aim at identifying the coordinated response of those institutions to the pandemic. And on the other hand, the major initiative promoted by the European Commission, the Team Europe Joint Response, where 135 million euro have been allocated to support initiatives promoted by CDP. And thanks to the leverage effect, which is linked to the guarantee mechanism that was previously described by Stefano Manservisi and Kay, those initiatives potentially can generate up to 540 million euro of investment in Africa over the next 4 years, including intervention to support the economic recovery of partner countries, as well as actions in favor of local health systems. In the last few months, our strategy of intervention has focused on 3 main guidelines, and of course, relying very much on blending and this European exercise of reorientation. The financing of financial intermediaries, which thanks to the network throughout the local area are able to effectively deliver financial resources in favor of local development projects to mitigate the socio-economic impact of the emergency. The health sector initiatives, where we are looking with increasing interest also to several initiatives in cooperation with others, multilateral institution. EIB is one of those institutions at European level promoting a platform of intervention in the diagnostic health system. And looking also in the health sector to both initiative on the debt side and on the equity side. A third line of intervention is the private sector, specifically looking at this moment in this time to the Italian business, where we want to support the Italian business with their activity in developing countries, with a strong link, of course, to the Sustainable Development Goals, both by financing their sustainable local supply chain and by directly financing their local projects. Of course, in a framework which is strictly compliant with the 2030 agenda. And I would like to conclude by observing that we are on a turning point. The pandemic is a crisis that the world must face together. And the next event, the Financing Common Summit that will take place on November 12 within the Paris Peace Forum, can be an opportunity to stress this strategy and this direction. It will gather this event for the first time all public development banks from around the world, as well as their stakeholders and partners, and will address a common need to build new form of prosperity and direct finance for the future we want. We must learn to share the planet, and we will only be able to do so if we are able to commit ourselves and invest in global cooperation, in global partnership, to create an environment capable of promoting a lasting, a resilient, sustainable growth. The European and the global DFI, we think, are all called to this task, and I can say that we at CDP are ready to play our part.
Thank you, Antonella. Very clear now. Pierre Heilbron, the Vice President of the EBRD. Now, you have been in this business, let's say, even before the NADA, if I may say it in this way. Obviously, as a development bank, but also you personally. Now, what do you see in the framework I described at the beginning and enriched by the interventions by all the colleagues? How do you see, let's say, the sort of leapfrogging that the system is willing to do today, counting much more on a critical mass, which is a bit more Europe in a sense, counting much more on, let's say, sharing knowledge and a bit less competing, on the same field. But once said that, you have also to turn that into practice, into projects which are not just grants under a different form, but which are really investment, which are producing business sustainable, which are creating jobs sustainable, which are, in other terms, a way to empower even more, let's say, the partners with which we are working. Please, Pierre.
Yes, thank you very much, Stefano, and it's great to be with you, at least on the screen, with real friends. I think, and beyond our professional partnership, which is long-standing. As you mentioned, Stefano, it's we are in this business for some time, and maybe I will for the young audience which is joining us, I will say 2 words about what we are as EBRD. But I think what you mentioned, which is very much tackling the challenges we have in front of us and really changing more or less the size, amplify what we've been doing is critical if we want to raise up to the expectations which are all of us. So this is one issue, I think, and I will say a few words about that. I think it's a practical challenge. It's not only a theoretical, intellectual, geopolitical challenge in many ways. It's a practical challenge about how to make it happen. And probably experience can be helpful in that, but also creativity, innovation. And I think Antonella mentioned also what CDP is doing for a young institution in that business. It is very impressive what has been developed by CDP, and I think also youth can bring a lot in this business as well as experience. So I think it's a combination of two. About experience, and maybe the experience of EBRD before going into the substance. So EBRD is, you can say, an old, but at the same time a young institution. We've been created just after the end of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union exploded. So in 1991, and the idea was in a way quite modern, quite revolutionary, because it was very much based on the idea that private entrepreneurship would be key if we wanted to bring sustainable change and sustainable development. The idea that things would not come from a top-down approach, but would come from the society, the entrepreneurs, individual initiatives. That may sound now obvious. Everybody is saying that. Everybody is saying public money will not be enough. SDG will not be implemented if we don't crowd in private money. But EBRD was very much alone, or very much more or less defending this, not because only we have experience there, but because it's our mandate. So at the inception, we were covering more or less ex-communist countries, and the bank expanded its geographical footprint to other countries in the Mediterranean more recently, but also to a wider region. We cover now 38 countries where we invest, and we bring policy support. We have a large shareholder base dominated by the European Union member state and the Commission. By the way, it's the only international institution where the Commission has shares. So that's quite also a distinctive feature. But we have in our shareholding the US, other G7 powers, and all our countries of operation are part of also our governance, with the latest members being Algeria and Iraq, which are our governing bodies, and our ministers, who are our governors, decided to have these two countries joining the 71 members of and shareholder of the bank. So that's what we are. In terms of focus, we do 80% in the private sector, very much in line with what I said about what we are. We have a track record on the green area, aiming at becoming a majority green bank by 2025, and very much focusing on both low carbon economy, which is a first pillar where we have decades now of experience, but also promotion of equality of opportunities and acceleration of the digital transition. We do that not only through being remote from the field, from London, but we have resident offices, and sometimes many of them in each country we cover, in Eastern Central Europe, in the Mediterranean, in Central Asia. So very much delivering what Kate described through our 10 billions or so euro of investment each year. So where does it bring more or less in this discussion about the challenges and opportunities of European development cooperation? First, I think we're living through a very exciting period, you can say, and despite all the difficulties and also the dramatic implication of this crisis, it is quite important to have seen the European leaders in July come at least united, because we are always deploring division, united around a vision to be deployed in the next 7 years. For once, the pandemic has not been considered as a moral hazard or problem for one country, one set of EU countries, but as a common challenge which was warranted a common response. For once, also, there has been an increased awareness that the geopolitical environment was uncertain, so the Europeans had to regroup more or less, and that otherwise we would give the keys also of our own freedom development to others. So that's also a change, and I think that led to probably a new way of looking at not only our recovery, but as you said, Stefano, in your introduction, the fact that there are interlinkages between their recovery, the recovery in the neighborhood countries in Africa, and our recovery and the capacity to sustain development within Europe, bringing to the front also the question of inequalities, migration, all the issues which obviously climate change and its implication as things we have to deal in common. The main challenges there are, I think, twofold. One type of challenge is linked to implementation, because as we know, we're sometimes very good in signing statement, making statement at the level of heads of states, and it is more difficult to implement instruments, objectives, ambitions in practice. And that is very much something which is critical, I think, in the future. There has been, through also this COVID crisis response, steps going in the right direction, which are very much, in fact, the underlying the ambition. And Dici, you mentioned, and you've been one of the main brain behind the instrument, which is very much around cooperation among developing partners. So not competition. Sometimes competition is good when it leads to synergies and also better value for the end recipient. But sometimes when it's based on not a level playing field, not good ideas, duplication of resources, this leads to worse results. So I think the initiative linked to Team Europe, which is more or less bringing development institutions, but also member states, European ones, very much coordinating much more on the ground, but their program is a very good step. It is complementary to the open architecture concept, which is very much linked to the fact that none of us have the keys to solve the issues which are in front of us. So we have to go there together if we want to solve the issues of development in Europe, in the neighborhood and beyond. I will not go into details, but obviously will be very happy to answer any questions about what it means in practice. But that I would say, having the capacity to make the system now work in practice as a coordinated system is key to me, and this has to happen quickly. So we cannot wait for only new governance and new rules to be set into the future, but doing it at the local level, also with EU delegations, our representation there, and really do that together. The second, and I will finish by that, challenge, but also important question we have to tackle, I think, is the link between European sovereignty or European autonomy and multilateralism. We have, as I said, EBRD is really a mixture of the two. We are European by heart, we are European by ownership. We are not totally European in our ownership, because also countries of operation partners are members of the organization and other partners are also there. But we are multilateral, as I said, in our DNA. And there, in fact, this crisis led to also many reflections about dependency of Europe, European responsibility in solving problems within Europe and outside Europe. And there are two options possible. There is an option where we build bilateral instruments at the European level, which more or less are crafted to solve problems in the world. It's one way. By the way, in that type of option, you may wonder, why do you need institution at national level, for example? Because if you have an awareness that it should be a bilateral response at the European level, or you have a second option, which I believe is also something which should be considered, which is how Europe can export its values, its development model outside beyond its borders, putting more or less the others on the more or less and their money also in line with what we try to achieve as Europeans. And there, I think, the multilateral dimension, or the dimension where you can bring others around your standards, about your ambitions, about your objectives, is a very powerful model, because you build partnership, you build ownership also in countries where you can talk not only about giving grants, giving subsidies, but co-working on reform path, on how you can change also the legislation, the governance of public entities, of private companies, so that you lay the foundations for sustainable development. And I think this is the second challenge, I would say, which in a way Europe in the next months will have to bring answers to. There has been the launch of beyond the proposal of the Commission in the frame of the MFF. There has been this report commissioned to wise persons, which very much underlies these issues. Afterwards, these are also matter of political decision and political awareness of European leaders.
Thank you very much, Pierre. And I think this last point is particularly important. Has not been underlined enough previously, but obviously is absolutely clear. In a sense, there is not only the idea to do better, but there is also the necessity to do it in the interest of European values, if I may say so. There is more stakes which are here on the table. Now, before going to a second round, and mindful of the fact that we have 15 minutes, I've seen at least one hand raised by the students, Giovanni D'Agostino and Clémence Maquet. Sorry for the pronunciation, it's not good. Please, two questions, very, very short, and addressing to a precise, let's say, speaker. Please, D'Agostino first.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Giovanni D'Agostino, second-year student at Global Governance. And I think Vice President Heilbronn partly answered my question, but I will try to address it to you, Vice President. Almost all the panelists today mentioned the importance of diverting more money towards developing countries. I would like to build up on that. Two researchers by the name of Paul Clist and Gabriele Restelli from the Global Development Institute of University of Manchester have recently published a paper that shows the inefficiency of international aid in lowering the number of asylum seekers, for example. So the article is called Development Aid and International Migration to Italy, Does Aid Reduce Irregular Flows? So they managed to prove that the marginal cost in bilateral aid is 1.8 million per immigrant. So that was kind of surprising to me. In other words, international aid is not enough to face migration flows that we are experiencing. So my question is, do you agree with this conclusion? And if yes, what is another option that has not yet been considered even by your institution? Thank you.
Good. Now, let's take the second question. Clémence, it depends. Please.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for all the speeches that were really insightful. And my question will focus on the digital, as I deeply believe that this recovery will be the occasion of a deeper focus and integration of technological tools. And rightly on October 2nd, a report about the eventual issuance of a digital euro was published by the ECB. on which it has consulted the European population since 1 week. And in this report, you can read that this money is meant to favor financial inclusion, innovation, and give a fresh push to the digital economy. In the public debate as well, some argues that it could also constitute a vector of development for developing countries. So, knowing this, I would like to know how Europe is planning to tackle the issue of numerical fragmentation and inequalities of access that COVID-19 intensified even more, to build a solid basis for recovery and building the digital economy. And don't you think as well, this is my second question, that the issuance of such a money could threat the financial stability? Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. I think there are two very clear questions. One more for Pierre, but also others, and the second one perhaps more for Kai, representing here the Commission. Maybe since time is short, I will add a question on my side, and then we'll maybe give the possibility to have around also commenting about several things. My question is, or my observation is that, having worked into this and having listening a bit to the extraordinary work which has been done in the recent weeks, I see that, Europe and member states are putting order basically in their toolbox. They are settling a better supply side. But how the projects, the identification of projects, which eventually should create sustainable jobs and growth in partner countries, can be identified in a way which are not only part of, generally speaking, say development plans, which at the end is not that difficult, but which are matching business capacities in these countries. So in other terms, these are not just beautiful investment which are thought and designed with the excellent ideas, of course, in Europe, and better with less fragmentation and more, let's say, and more coordination, but that they are really living within the economy of the countries in which these investments are done. So in other terms, the putting the house in order and working better with the instruments which are about to be adopted is fantastic. It's a great achievement. Now, my question is for you to explain to everybody a bit, is how to put that in motion, not only in order to have good ways to put in motion, but to put in motion in order to match what are the economic realities, the business realities, and the economic activities in developing countries, in particular those which are supposed to be the priorities, like the countries in Africa and the Sahel and other parts which are particularly affected. So I will keep these three questions for the time being, because otherwise we'll go outside the time limit. And if there will be some more minutes, I will come back to a couple of other hands. Sorry if I cannot give you the floor today. Now, let's start in inverted way. Let's keep Pierre in the forefront. Please, Pierre.
Thank you, Stefano. Quickly, because also your last point relates a little bit to the question Giovanni raised. So in terms of academic studies, I think there are quite different conclusion on the link between migration. I wouldn't say asylum seeking, because the economic migration is not obviously has not the same more or less coverage than economic that asylum. So it's not a linear relationship between the two, between local development and migration. But there are studies which are quite clear, saying that up to a certain level of development, public infrastructure, governance issues at the local level make local life easier and encourage people not to migrate. And that's quite clear. after a certain point of development, there are a lot of studies which say that, you know, the most skilled people, when the education system is much better, more or less, these people go to also to have other experience in other countries. And by the way, you can link to also over time dividends for the countries of origin, and it's the history of migration, also an economic migration within Europe, which has an extremely positive element. This leads to the point that also it is about investment, but it's not, I would say, primarily about just investment flows. And when you, Stephanie, you mentioned beyond the toolbox, what is critical is, I think, the capacity to build the institution locally. And when I say institution, it's public institutions, but also private institutions, companies which are run according to governance rules which are transparent, which create accountability. And this capacity building is, I think, an integral part of the equation, and that's why also it's not about only guarantees. It's not about. It's also about technical assistance and knowledge transfer to the countries where we operate. So I would say that's extremely important. And a word on the second question, which is very much touching on something which is even more relevant in the crisis, which is the digital divide. In fact, this crisis is leading to an increase in inequalities in front of new technologies. It can be, by the way, a huge opportunity for some of countries, because it can allow, for example, countries to leapfrog what we see in some of the countries we are advising, because these countries, without this digital revolution, would take probably 100 years to do what they can do if the conditions are met to do it in 5 years or 2 years. So that is really not only a challenge, I would say, but something where developing institutions, national, obviously, governments have to divide the right incentives so that the private actors can reap the fruits of this opportunity.
Good. Thank you. Antonella Baldino, 2 minutes, unfortunately, because we will be kicked off from the room. So therefore,
we have an answer, a general answer on the impact of aid. We all know that aid in terms of mobilizing public resources to have an impact on developing countries, and more generally speaking on sustainable development, the public resources are just a part, and just a small part of the answer to the needs we have in order to meet the 2030 agenda. And to this end, what is important is to look at the possibility of mobilizing private sector resources. Private sector resources in order to generate local public development, together with progress on the institutional settings and institutional framework, which enable investment that, as we know, as already we have the experience in Europe, can generate development, meaning, as Pierre was saying, development of basic infrastructure and regulatory framework that can create a climate which favor the private investment. We are dealing with these challenges of more than mobilizing public aid, is mobilizing in a non-distorted way, private sector capital, and the new financial instruments provided by the European Union. The open architecture, the open financial architecture goes in this direction. So to be additional with respect to the public aid, which of course are limited in terms of amount and limited also in terms of possibility of having an impact on major phenomena such as the migrations. So we have to consider a more wide and a menu of possible intervention, which is much more complex, and that goes behind the public aid, which I think are part of the analysis of this academic paper you mentioned before. So we look forward in creating and designing this new financial architecture and new instruments in order to be more effective on the local development of the partner countries.
Thank you, Antonella. Kai Pahl, please. I don't know if Kai is still around. Let's say Leonardo Carminati, please.
Sorry, no, I was muted. No,
please. Okay.
Okay.
Kai,
no, just on migration. We've never said that it will have an effect in the short run on migration. This is about creating economic opportunity in the long run. In the interim, you have the kinds of effects that Pierre mentioned, where people may actually have more opportunity to migrate and might use that opportunity. Digital sectors, including digital payments, there is huge opportunity for developing countries from these sectors. I mean, the leapfrogging Pierre mentioned, you have often or inherently very low marginal costs in digital products, which means you can sell them relatively easily also to people with low purchasing power. And there are potentially very positive effects on governance when you have more electronic payments and more traceability of payments. I mean, think of teachers or soldiers that are not paid currently in many countries. I mean, once you can ensure that people are paid and payments are traceable, I mean, that can have a huge impact. So digital sectors, including digital payments, have a huge potential, which is why they're an important sector for us as well.
Thank you. Leonardo Carminati, the last minute.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I can say what is driving the inspiration of the aim of doing our project. We have to ask ourselves what are the needs of the local communities. We have to understand what is the situation. And when we speak about local communities, it's because we have to be very clear and very understanding of the needs and make our intervention in terms of self-determination of the impact. Then we have to think about the impact. But when we speak about the impact, we are in a level of analysis that should drive our action. The aim of our intervention is under the umbrella of the Agenda 2030, of course. And I was listening that you are speaking about migration and the impact on the investment that can solve or not this issue. I think that it is a very large and wide topic, and we have to think about to grow the communities, to develop the communities, and then understanding what kind of impact will have on the migration. But the aim is to give them an opportunity with the right tools in terms of financial, in terms of self-determination, and in terms of respecting the dignity.
Thank you, Leonardo. I think that we have now reached the time limit which were given. You know, it's as obviously, you know, the the atmosphere starting heating up. So it would have been lovely to stay together a bit more. I say that also for the students, obviously listening, and they could not interact in full, but we have to close. I would like to thank you on behalf of Festival della Diplomazia, all the panelists, all the friends actually, because we have been not only working together, but also keeping strong relationship. I like to say that, if we had to have an evidence of the fact that reshaping international partnership around the big challenges which have been described and created and further accelerated by the COVID crisis is part and parcel of building what von der Leyen called a geopolitical union, a geopolitical commission. So therefore, just part of the problem has been addressed, but for everybody to be aware of the fact that here the issue at stake are sometimes a bit bigger than what people can believe. It's really about what we are there for as Europe, what we have to do together, and how we can contribute to reshape a bit the world of the after crisis. So it's very much geopolitical. It's not only the way to implement a development program, which is fully part of this agenda. Now, thank you very much to everybody. I hope there will be other opportunities. Thank you, Pierre. Thank you, Antonella. Thank you, Kai. Thank you, Leonardo. Thank you, Professor Piglia, and all the students. And see you next time. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefano. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you soon.